In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. I know it's been a long day, so I hope I don't put you to sleep. Who was here last night? مين كان هنا امبارح بالليل؟ Just a few. You listened online. So what do you remember? Or what stood out in your mind, those people that were here yesterday or listened online? اللي كانوا هنا امبارح أو اللي سمعوا online، إيه اللي انتوا فاكرينه من اللي سمعتوه؟ Just to revise quickly. حبيب جالس أسس مدارس الأحد، صح؟ I think we said a bit more than this last night. Yes, I do that.
Teaching is crucial for our church and our faith.
Okay, teaching is crucial for our church and our faith. Yes, we touched on this. What else? And we'll talk more about, I mentioned yesterday that we will talk more about the importance of theological education in lecture number 3. So this evening. What else? What new did you learn about Habib Davis that you didn't know before? And most people, when I ask them, what do you know about Habib Davis, they tell me two things. أسس مدارس الأحد وكان العميد بتاع الكلية الكليريكية. بس. لكن I spoke for what, about an hour and a half yesterday. مش كده؟ طب ايه مش فاكرين حاجة؟ يبشر مين؟
لا يعلم.
مش ده اللي انا قلته امبارح. يعني جزء مظبوط اللي هو الجزء بتاع كنيسة العذراء في الرجال اللي كان بيعمل ايه هناك؟
كان ابتدى كلاسز يعلم.
كلاسز لمين؟
اللي عايز يبقى.
لا مش للشعب. أسس مدارس الأحد في كنيسة العذراء في الرجالة وكتب ايه ساعتها؟ كاتيكيزم سين جيم. صح؟ افتكرتوا دي؟ سؤال بسيط ورد، وكان بيعلم ده للولاد، كان بيجمع الأطفال في كنيسة العذراء في الفجالة، وابتدى بعد ما البابا كرولوس الخامس والمجمع طلعوا قرار في 1998 بأهمية التعليم للنشء وللأطفال. فاكرين دي قلناها امبارح؟ فابتدى كتب أول كتيب منهج بسيط اسمه كاتيكيزم سين وجيم، وابتدى يدرسه للأطفال. وزي ما قلت لكم امبارح برضه الكنيسة الأم في مصر وفي كل العالم بنحتفل السنة دي بكام سنة؟ 100 سنة لإيه؟ ها؟ Yes, but this year, what are we celebrating? This 100 years?
30 years. He was 30 years old.
لا. ريزرفنت كنت بنين الكاركتر دي. أكلت فول شديد امبارح ولا طعمية؟ السنة دي كنيسة بتحتفل ب100 سنة لتأسيس أول لجنة عليا لمدارس الأحد، وفي الوقت ده في 1918 أخذت مدارس الأحد الشكل الرسمي ليها. فده احتفال كبير ومهم جدا اللي الكنيسة بتحتفل بيه في 2018 100 سنة للتأسيس الرسمي لمدارس الأحد لما كونت اللجنة أول لجنة عليا لمدارس الأحد. لكن هو في الحقيقة مدارس الأحد ابتدت بطريقة غير رسمية قبل كده في 1900، وحبيب جرجس كان عنده الفكرة دي اللي هو يبتدي يأسس مدارس الأحد ويهتم بتعليم الأطفال بعد القرار بتاع المجمع وقرار البابا كورولوس الخامس في سنة 1898. قلنا إيه تاني امبارح؟ قلنا السنة دي برضو بنحتفل ب100 سنة لحاجة تانية حصلت من أسبوعين. يوم 14 سبتمبر 1918 حصل ايه؟ حد فاكر؟ What happened on the 14th of September 1918?
Abuna, you don't remember?
بس أنا كنت حاجة خاصة بالكلية الإكليريكية في مصر.
هو ابتدى يدرس.
لا هو ابتدى يدرس من قبل كده.
آلة الطبع؟
أمم؟
آلة الطبع؟
تاني؟
آلة الطبع كانت
لا ده ما كانش حبيب جرجس. انتوا لخبطتوا كل التاريخ مع بعض. Yes.
Was it the start of teaching specifically to prepare priesthood?
No. No. It was the date where he was appointed as the dean of the theological college. After its first dean, whose name was يوسف مانكاريوس. كان أول عميد للكلية الإكليريكية لما تأسست في نوفمبر 1893 وبعد نياحته البابا كرولوس عين حبيب جرجس العميد الثاني للإكليريكية. فمن أسبوعين يوم 14 سبتمبر الكنيسة مفروض تحتفل أو احتفلت ب100 سنة لحبيب جرجس كعميد، ويا ريت يتعمل احتفال كبير في كل حتة في المهجر وفي مصر نفتكر التاريخ ده لأن ده برضه تاريخ مهم.
كان ساعتها اتخرج ولا كان ساعتها؟
ده طبعا كان اتخرج وكان عمل نوايا للإكليريكية وطور في المناهج وكان اترسم أرش دياكون وكان طور في الإكليريكية كتير، بس هنتكلم عن الإكليريكية والتعليم اللاهوتي أكتر في المحاضرة بتاعت بالليل. Anything else you remember? Okay. So we spoke about many things, and I said also last night that there were many issues that I wanted to talk about today. I mentioned about the archives, for example, and maybe I should tell you this story now. كم مرة قابلت واحد باحث في مصر وكان اداني كام ورقة كده من الأرشيف بتاع البطرخانة عن حبيب جرجس، وقال لي لما تيجي فرصة ابقى انزل شوف في الأرشيف يمكن تلاقي حاجة عن حبيب جرجس. Is there anyone here who doesn't know Arabic? I need to repeat things in English. I prefer English, but I know that many people.
English is fine.
بس هيشتكوا بتوع العرب.
No. English.
So one of the researchers has given me a few papers about Habib Gerges that he found in the archives of the Patriarchate and said to me, when you get the chance, go down to the archives, maybe you'll find something about Habib Gerges there. I didn't take notice much at the time, and a few years passed, and as I got more serious about my research, I said maybe it's time to go and see these archives. So the Patriarchate in Cairo has archives. I did not know this before. Where are they stored? Does anyone know? Underneath St. Mark Cathedral in the Patriarchate. If you go under the stairs on the right side, I'm not sure if they're still there or they have moved. They're still there.
The older one.
No, the current cathedral,
Oh, that.
Abbasiyya. Okay? So I went there. There is a young man there who was responsible for the archives. So I asked him, do you have a catalog of what is in the archives? So he pulled out a few pages, handwritten. I looked through it quickly. I found the name Habib Gerges. I got excited. I found a file called Habib Gerges. So I took out the file. It was a few pages. I photographed them. He photographed them for me. I took them home and started to read, and then I discovered it's not the Habib Gerges that I'm looking for, but it was someone who was an employee of the Patriarchate many years ago. When I went down into the archives, and I cannot begin describing to you, unfortunately, the situation of what the archives was in. Full of dust, heat, humidity, rats, everything you can think of. I'm sorry to say this. I hope it has changed now, but this is the reality of what the archives was like back in 2013.
Wow.
Okay? And I found there the minutes of the Majlis al-Mali, or the Lay Community Council. And Habib Gerges was elected 3 times with the top number of votes into the Lay Community Council. And if you remember yesterday when I was speaking, I said to you that there was a big clash between Pope Rhodos V and the Majlis al-Mali, or the Lay Community Council, who were predominantly lay elite people that were well educated in private schools, mainly in the Western missionary schools. And there was a tug of war over who would control the finances, the schools, and so on. And it led to the banishment of Pope Rhodos V for about 6 or 7 months. He was almost like under house arrest in Baramos Monastery and not able to leave until the Khedive of the time issued a decree for him to return back to his seat. And as I mentioned to you yesterday, it was a very dark period in our history. So I said maybe in these minutes there may be some information about the work of Habib Gerges with respect to education. So I agreed with the man responsible. I would come tomorrow morning with a photographer to photograph the minutes of the Majlis al-Mali during the period of Habib Gerges, because they're all bound in books. I said maybe there's important information there. We agreed 10 o'clock I would come. I went the next morning. He didn't come. He came 1 hour late and he looked very, very upset. And I didn't know what was going on. This information is not in the book, by the way. I didn't put it in the book, but it's interesting. And I said to him, didn't we have an appointment 10 o'clock? He said, no. I can't help you. If you want something, go and speak to the responsible authority. And I will not mention who that is. We agreed everything was okay. Yes, Ali, no. So I went to the responsible person. Apparently he had given him some harsh words, how he allowed me to go into the archives in the first place. So I said to him, so, please, I'm doing a PhD on Habib Gerges, on religious education. I need to get access to the archives to see what's here. He said to me, don't trouble yourself. All we have here is marital contracts and land titles of the Patriarchate. Habib Gerges, Sunday School, Theological College, no, we have none of this material here. بس أبص أشوف, no. I'm not going to fight with him. I said, thank you very much, and I left. But something deep inside of me saying, there is something here. The following year when I went to Egypt, I went to Bishop Ioannis, who was the secretary of Pope Shenouda III of blessed memory at the time. I said to him, Sayyidina, I need to get access to the archives for my research. He said, write a note to His Holiness, I will give it to him and get back to you. And he did come back to me. And His Holiness, thankfully, because you know that he had a great love for Habib Gerges, asked Bishop Ioannis to come with me to the archives. So we went to the responsible person and the fellow who is looking after the archives. And now coming with me, the secretary of His Holiness. What do you think happened? الشيء طلع والبسكوت والدنيا اتغيرت. Huh? All the doors were open. Same person. Yeah. واحنا تحت امرك يا سيدنا, anything you want, and things change 180 degrees. And imagine that this is happening with a bishop in the church. Yeah? So imagine if a lay person was coming to do any research, what would have happened to them? And this, to me, is a very sad state. Obviously now the situation has changed. But imagine any lay person or scholar coming to do any research in our church to get access to archives or manuscripts was something very, very difficult. And there's probably many reasons behind this, that people don't want negative research to come out about the church and so on. So I understand the mindset, but just to explain to you what happened. Till now, I don't know what is in the archives. So I bought a photographer, we brought out the books of the minutes, and we started to photograph the minutes of the Majlis al-Melli at the time of Habib Gerges. I had a friend of mine with me who was a translator. I said to him, why don't you take this fellow to give you a tour of the archives and to tell you what he knows about the archives. He said the same thing to me. This section is about marital contracts, this section is about land titles. Then he came to a section and said, this section is about schools. And I was sitting right at the front of the hall and I heard him say schools. I said to him, what did you just say? He said, yes, this whole files, this section is about schools. So we pulled out one box, because it's all put in boxes numbered, and each box has many, many folders, and each folder has tens and tens of pages of documents. I pulled out one box, opened it carefully, full of dust, pulled out the first folder, started looking through the documents, and I find handwritten letters by Habib Gerges, originals, with his signature in red. Reports about Sunday school, reports about the theological college, curriculum that he had written, the religious pictures that he brought from Europe for the Sunday school, budgets of the Sunday school movement. I was standing in astonishment. I felt like Howard Carter when he discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun. But obviously with not that great grandeur, but to me it was a huge find. And remember, I said to you, I was told there is nothing here. You know how many pages I photographed about Habib Gerges' work? 7,130 pages of documents related to the work of Habib Gerges that no one even knew existed. I took all these documents, I photographed them all, and for the first time I made a catalog of all of these documents with a summary of what is in each document, and this became an appendix to my doctoral dissertation. So my doctoral dissertation ended up being about 800 pages because this appendix was a huge one. Imagine cataloging all of these documents took a very, very long time. But why I'm telling you this story, not because of the funny part that happened at the beginning, but these documents had a wealth of material that no one knew about, that really added an amazing flavor to know more and more about the work of Habib Gerges that no one knew about before this. Just the general things that you have been hearing year in, year out. So when you read the book, you will find many quotes that are actually taken from some of this archival material, very rich material that you'll find here. And some of it, of course, or a lot of it has to do with his work in the Sunday school movement. So, truly, as I mentioned to you yesterday, the quote from Pope Shenouda III, and I'll remind you again what he said. He said, our teacher, Archdeacon Habib Dervish, pioneer of religious education in our generation, started his life in an age that was almost void of religious education and knowledge. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, as the book of Genesis describes. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light, and the light was Habib Dervish. And I spoke to you in detail yesterday why His Holiness Pope Shenouda III said these words, because of the dark age, unfortunately, that the Church was living under with respect to ignorance and lack of education amongst our clergy and lay people. And Habib Dervish was the one that God sent at that appropriate time to change this darkness, to bring light to the Church. Sometimes when I think to myself about this important, prominent figure at the turn of the 20th century, and I wonder if the Lord did not bring Habib Dervish to be educated and to give importance to education in the Church, what may have happened to the Coptic Orthodox Church in Egypt? Remember the three things I mentioned yesterday that were tearing at the very thread of our Coptic identity. Do you remember them? Three things. One was the influence of the Western missionaries that had come into Egypt in the middle of the 19th century and began to establish very highly excellent schools and begin to proselytize amongst the Copts. This was one issue. The other one was the influence and the interference from the authorities inside of the Church and trying to cause problems. And the third one was the division that was happening between the hierarchy, between the bishops and clergy, and the lay elite that had been educated in the private schools. These three things were tearing at the very thread of our Coptic identity. And I wonder if Habib Dervish was not there to care for education, would it still be an Orthodox Church? Would we have gone after the Catholics or the Protestants? Or what would have the Coptic Orthodox Church looked like today if it was not for the influence of this great saint in our modern era and the influence and the role that he played with respect to Sunday schools and with respect to theological education? So truly Habib Dervish was allied to Egypt, and particularly he was allied for the Coptic Church with respect to religious and theological education. He was, in my opinion, a blazing pioneer with an amazing zeal, passion, and tenacity in achieving his goal in maintaining Coptic identity and enlightening the Copts about their faith and kindling a burning desire in them towards the importance of Christian Orthodox faith and education. And I mentioned to you yesterday when he was a student in 1897 that he gave his first lecture titled Christian Religion, الديانة المسيحية, and who was in attendance, very important figure, Tadros Bek Shenouda al-Mankabadi, who was the editor-in-chief of Misr newspaper, which was one of the Coptic newspapers at the time. He was so impressed by his lecture, he printed thousands of copies and distributed it, and I mentioned to you what the lecture was about. The second lecture was the one that Pope Carolus V attended in Harat Sa'ayin, where he was blessing him and blessing the people and feeling that preaching and teaching was going to return back to the church through the work of this young deacon. St. Habib Gerges felt a great responsibility towards each child throughout Egypt and beyond, to bring them closer to the Lord Jesus Christ, to a deeper understanding of their faith, and to have a great sense of pride in their Coptic identity, and to live as patriotic citizens of Egypt. So he was a very strong nationalist. He loved Egypt very much, and he wanted all of the Copts from a very young age to have this pride of being Egyptians. You know, we hear, for example, today, how His Holiness Pope Tawadros II, wherever he goes, everywhere in the world, when he came to us in Australia, here in all of his meetings, he always invites all of his children to come to Egypt, to their homeland, to come and see all of the beautiful monasteries and churches and the pharaonic sites, and to have this deep connection. We must never, in my opinion, lose this connection with Egypt. Just because we've come to America or Canada or Australia doesn't mean that we forget our roots. We must never forget our roots. We must always be embedded deep in our hearts. It should run through our blood, yeah, because this is where our church was established. A church of martyrs, not only in our history, but even till our modern times. So Habib Gerges was very much a nationalist, and he embedded this in the curriculum as well that he established for the children, how to live as patriotic citizens of Egypt. The establishment and success of the Sunday school movement, which flourishes even today in the Coptic Orthodox Church, are attributable largely to the work of St. Habib Gerges. While still a student at the Coptic Orthodox Seminary in Cairo, Habib Gerges realized that children were the key to the revival of the church. The children were the key to the revival of the church. Not only had generations of young Copts been deprived of a sound education in their faith, but they were the most vulnerable to conversion to competing denominations that had entered into Egypt in the mid-19th century. So he saw this threat very, very clear, that these other denominations that were coming, easily they can target the children through education, through giving them, gifts and other things to entice them. He was very, very aware of this. So he saw them as the most vulnerable at this young age to conversion. Habib Gerges' community was mired in illiteracy, ignorance, and apathy. Many people in Egypt at that time, even till today, unfortunately, illiteracy is still a big problem in Egypt. So if now it is a big problem, even though it is improving, but imagine over 100 years ago what illiteracy was like amongst Copts. Not only in the cities, but it was even much worse in the villages. And I will tell you in a little while, I'll tell you now, before I forget, I discovered a very important book in the archives called Iftiqad al-Qarya, Visitation to the Villages. And Habib Gerges put a very important system for caring for village education. During the 3-month summer period, he would gather many of the Sunday school teachers from Cairo and Alexandria, and he would send them 2 by 2 to the villages. At the time, there was a census in Egypt that you could purchase, and you could find where are the Copts located in the villages and throughout Egypt. So he would say to them, there was a central office of Sunday school, which he established inside of the theological college. He would tell the servants, go and get this census. He would send them 2 by 2 that would have a journey clearly set out for them. And as they are moving, they would enter into each village. When they enter the village, they divide from each other during the day. And each servant to go and visit 10 homes in the village. They would take an image of the Lord Jesus Christ and put it in the living room. Usually most of their houses were simple. It was just one main room and maybe a bedroom and a bathroom. That would be it. Why? They would take an image of the Lord Jesus Christ. Some of these families did not even know they were Christian. They were not even baptizing their children. They were not going to church. Why? Because there was no churches in the villages at the time. And no priests were going to visit these people in the villages. يعني الموضوع كان ضايع خالص. You can imagine this situation, what it looks like. And the churches in the cities were too far for them and they could not afford to take transportation to go to the church. So Habib Gerges then encouraged the priests, the altar board, and to enter into the villages and begin to pray liturgies for the people in the villages. He also established offices around a group of villages so that these servants, when they go, they would see what are the problems that are happening and report these problems back to this central office, so that this office would be manned by several servants to begin looking at these problems and how can they be solved. So one of the problems they discovered was the huge illiteracy that was in the villages, that people could not read and write. So in one of the footnotes in this important booklet, Habib Gerges writes to the servants and he says to them, go to the central office in Cairo of Sunday school and find the books about the life of Jesus Christ written in the Lobach method. And I read this in Arabic, Lobach. I didn't know, never heard this name before. Thank God for Google. I Googled the name, I just tried to write it in English, and the first thing came up. The name of an American missionary called Charles Frank Lobach. This man was sent to preach in the Philippines to the Moro tribes. The Moro tribes in Philippines at that time were illiterate people. And he devised a system called each one teach one. Each person that does not know how to read and write to teach the rest of the people in the area how to read and write. So Habib Gerges said to the servants, take these books about the life of Jesus that have been translated into Arabic using the Lobach method and find one or two people in the village that can read and write to begin teaching the rest of the village how to read and write. Why? So that they can begin reading the Bible, begin knowing their faith, begin living a spiritual life. This was the purpose behind him wanting the people to be literate and be able to read and write. But I think the challenge that he would have found is whether he actually could find one or two people in the villages that could actually read and write. But at least it gives you an idea of the vision and how Habib Gerges was thinking at the time of how he wanted to transform the lives of the Copts to be literate people, to be educated, and to be able to live their Christian life fully. Really quite amazing when you read this material, and you read a little bit about this. I write a little bit about it in my book if you are interested. But it was a really fascinating thing to see how he was caring for every single individual. And he didn't just care for the children in the cities or in the main churches, but he was interested to find every single soul and to bring religious education to every single person. And not only for the children, but for the families. So in the evening, the servants would gather the whole village together. Because after they visited each home and gave them a Bible study, they would gather the youth together and speak to them, and they would gather the whole village together and to have a Bible study with everyone in the village in the evening. And they would go from village to village using the same system. So Habib Dervis's community was mired in illiteracy, ignorance, and apathy. He decided to attack this problem head-on, and as in the case of most of his conquests, he chose education as his weapon. He began informally by gathering local children on Sundays at the various churches and societies in Cairo, beginning with the church, as I mentioned, of the Virgin Mary in the middle-class suburb of El-Fajjala in 1900. He taught these young people about the Bible, the Coptic rites, church history, and the lives of Egyptian saints and martyrs. These were some of the topics that he would speak to the children about. Saint Habib Dervis decided to emulate the Western missionaries. So he got this idea of Sunday schools from what was then called Sabbath schools that the Western missionaries had begun to establish in Egypt. So he got the idea from them, but then he baptized it and made it Orthodox and made sure that the teaching that the children were receiving was Coptic Orthodox teaching. He wrote the Coptic Catechism, كتاب خلاصة الأصول الإيمانية في معتقدات الكنيسة القبطية الأرثوذكسية. The Doctrines of the Coptic Orthodox Faith, a foundational synopsis. This was one of the first books that he wrote. A question and answer catechism for grades 1 to 4 primary, and he wrote them in 3 volumes, which was published in a series of 4 books in 1898. And the popularity of his classes continued to grow. At this time, the Coptic hierarchy was starting to take action in the field, and no doubt this inspired Habib Dervis in his work. In 1898, the Holy Synod issued its decree on the necessity of Christian education for school children. And the following year, Pope Carolus V acknowledged the Church's responsibility to provide Christian education to the young. Then in 1903, the 3rd decree was issued from the Holy Synod on 4 major concerns that had a strong bearing on Habib Dervis's work pertaining to implant Christian education among Coptic children from a very young age. His Holiness Pope Carolus V, probably acting on a suggestion offered to him by Habib Dervis during one of their regular weekly discussions, decided in 1918 to form a general committee to oversee religious education offered to state school students on Fridays and to Coptic school students on Sundays, because as I mentioned yesterday, that Pope Cyril V had established several Coptic schools for boys and girls. So they started then to think how to introduce religious education to the Copts that were going to state schools and also to those that were going to Coptic schools on Sundays. The committee had 10 members, including Habib Dervis, and was headquartered at the seminary. And this was a very smart idea, that he established a central committee and established the work of Sunday schools at the seminary or at the theological college. And then branches began to be set up all throughout Egypt and even beyond into Sudan and even into Ethiopia. Basing the formative work of the Sunday schools at the seminary was a strategic move on Habib Dervis's part. The seminary was the heart of education in the church. The seminary was the heart of education in the church, the place where future Coptic leaders, priests, deacons, and lay leaders were formed. And so I cannot stress enough the importance of having strong theological colleges for our church around the world. This is probably the most lacking thing in our church. We have done so many things right, but we still have not got theological education right in our church. If we get this right, I think we will be even more and more successful as we move into the future. And not just for the lands of immigration or abroad, but in Egypt as well. Having powerful theological colleges is really critical. So it thus became an ideal laboratory where Habib Gerges could test his ideas and theories on the faculty and students. The seminary's intellectual environment fostered the publications and research needed to develop sound pedagogical methods, textbooks, and curricula, setting the right tone for this vital work of educating the young. He did not only just interested in educating the young, but also he looked for the blue-collar workers, the ones that were working in factories and things like this, and also prepared curricula for them and had meetings for them. He really cared for every single person in the community to get them educated. As defined by Habib Gerges, the aims of Sunday schools later set out in the Sunday School Constitution. He did Amal Dustur Madaris al-Ahad later in his life, in 1949, known as the Fundamental Law for Coptic Orthodox Sunday Schools and the Coptic Youth League. You know that in our church we have a Bishop of Youth, His Grace Bishop Musa, and we have a bishopric of youth that he leads. But in fact, youth ministry in the Coptic Orthodox Church was established by Habib Gerges back early in the 20th century when he established what was known as the Coptic Youth League in the See of St. Mark, including encouraging children to keep Sunday as a holy day, to attend the liturgy, and to receive Holy Communion on Sunday in Coptic schools and Friday in government schools. I also mentioned to you yesterday that many people, when they come to church, if they were going to church, they were not partaking of Holy Communion. It was Habib Gerges that began pushing for this, that when you come to liturgy, you come and you partake of the body and blood of Christ. Teaching the students scripture and virtues, and implanting in them a spirit of nationalism and community service were also part of Habib Gerges' vision. Girls were to be taught too, but separately from boys. So he was not only interested in teaching boys, but also gave attention to the education of girls as well. Habib Gerges began moving in an expansive way to ensure that religious education spread beyond Cairo to every church and society in Egypt, and even into Sudan and Ethiopia. Branches of the Sunday school movement were established in each Egyptian parish and its surrounding villages and towns, all under the leadership of the local parish priest and also the bishop of each diocese. The governance arrangement was a significant asset to the movement, since it meant that Sunday schools were an activity the priests controlled rather than one that challenged their authority. So he gave them the authority to be able to lead the Sunday school movement in their parish, to lead it, and so they did not feel that it was something threatening to them or to their authority, but actually something that will be of benefit and strengthen their ministry. At each church, a Sunday school was established, while in each city, a Coptic Youth League was set up. The Coptic Youth League had branches in every church and brought members together on a regular basis to discuss general strategies. The Coptic Youth League officially commenced in 1918, so this year also is 100 years since the establishment of youth ministry in our church. And it continued to evolve until its final structure in 1948. So this year also marks 100 years since the establishment of youth ministry in the Coptic Church under the wise leadership of Habib Gerges, and I hope that this can be included in the celebrations this year. The strong links between the Sunday School movement's headquarters and branches helped to entrench a uniform educational philosophy across the country. So having that central committee for Sunday School and the curriculums coming out from there, this gave uniformity across all of the branches of Sunday School all throughout Egypt, and I think this is very important. And I know it was announced this year that a new central committee for Sunday School will be formed in Egypt. The organization was reformed in 1927, and the committee enlarged to 20 members, including Habib Gerges as General Secretary of the committee. The Sunday schools established branches in provinces all over Egypt that grew into centers of spiritual activity, with prayer groups, classes, and meetings for every grade. And it was not unusual for Sunday school classes to be initiated even before a church had its own priest. This is how the movement had begun to grow so quickly. By 1938, there were 85 Sunday school branches in Cairo and the provinces, 3 in Sudan and 1 in Ethiopia. Altogether, there were 10,000 students of various ages attending Sunday schools across Egypt and 1,000 in Ethiopia. Habib Gerges printed 9,000 4-page lessons each month for the oldest students and 6,000 religious pictures with a simple description of the lessons on the back for the younger ones. So he brought these beautiful colored religious pictures of Bible stories, and then on the back of them he would print a summary of the lesson and a verse so that the students could take this home as a summary of what they learned this Sunday in their class. When I was looking through the archival material, I found a report that he wrote for a 1-year period, for 9-month period of Sunday school activity over all of Egypt, where he would write how many branches, what publications were done, how many photos, how much money was spent on Sunday school, and he would present this to the whole church, to the Pope, to the bishops, to the clergy. And in one of these reports, the amount of Copts at the end of the 1940s in Egypt was around 1 million Copts. This was the total population of Copts in Egypt. You know, the official magazine of the church today is Al-Karaza magazine. The Copts now, we are not less than about 15 million in Egypt and abroad. How many copies of the Karaza magazine do you think are published every 2 weeks? سيبك من الابس دلوقتي بتكلم printed copy. How many printed copies of Karaza magazine do you think are distributed around the world? Millions? How many? Not more than 50,000. 50,000, okay? This is with 15 million Copts. Now go back 100 years, just about. How many religious pictures in a 9-month period was Habib Gerges publishing?
9 and 6.
For Sunday school?
It says 9,000.
No, this was the lessons, not the pictures. You know what the report says? 1.35 million. And I can't remember how much it cost him, but it was quite an amount for back at that time. And he distributed, I think, 900,000 of those pictures, and the rest were kept in storage. Why? because he believed in the importance of popular education. What do I mean by popular education? I told you there was a huge illiteracy problem in Egypt. Yeah? So when people see a picture, they learn a lesson from it. Look at all the icons we have around our churches. Each one in itself tells a story. Yeah? Tells a story. You look at the image of the resurrection and you remember, that the Lord Jesus Christ arose from the dead on the third day. You look at the icon at the back of the wedding of Cana of Galilee and transforming the water into wine. Or the icon of Christ with the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and you remember the feeding of the 5,000. Or the icon of the Lord on the donkey with the people with the palms saying Hosanna in the highest. Yeah? Each one tells a story and it is related to something in the scriptures or in our history. Yeah? So this was one way of having, when you see a picture, you remember more than just maybe reading something. So this was a popular way of teaching the children through religious pictures. And he distributed these pictures all throughout Egypt, Sudan, and in Ethiopia. This was one method of popular education that Habib Gerges used. The other one was through hymns. He was a poet. He wrote several books of Christian songs, Coptic songs, to teach the doctrine of the church through the music, and he adapted Coptic music from the liturgy, from the tasbihah, from qiyah praises, and then put these words and formed these beautiful songs for the children to learn the faith of the church this way, and did not use the Western music that the Westerners had brought into Egypt with them. So he wanted to maintain this Coptic identity this way. He was very smart man. So we spoke about the religious pictures. He approved a library for Sunday schools at Giza that served as a hub for communicating with Sunday schools in both Upper and Lower Egypt outside of Cairo and Alexandria. Educational materials introduced by the Western missionaries, such as religious pictures and illustrated books, became central to Habib Gerges' method. These were being given free to school children in Cairo who received them eagerly. Titles distributed in Egypt by what was known as the Malta Press included scripture stories and dogmatic teachings. And there is ample evidence to prove that Habib Gerges heavily utilized literature from abroad in his teaching, though he made sure he adapted this material to suit the Orthodox faith. Habib Gerges led and participated in 2 important conferences for Sunday school teachers. One was held in 1941, and the second was held in 1949, and this was for the first time to happen in the history of our church. The first of their kind in the Coptic Church. These conferences served both as an opportunity to further the spiritual growth of the teachers and as a forum to foster collaboration by discussing planning, organization, and teaching methods. The first conference, which took place in November of 1941, was attended by more than 350 teachers, representing 50 Sunday schools in Cairo. Participants at this conference decided that the Department for the Training of Sunday School Teachers should be established at the seminary with a special system and program for 3 years of study. So he planned a whole curriculum for the teachers, no one to be able to teach Sunday school until they had completed this program at the seminary for 3 years. Nobody could be accredited to teach Sunday school without this qualification, and they would have the carnet or a card saying that they are approved with his signature on it. Not anyone just can come into a class without being trained how to teach children. He planned 6 volumes of books for Sunday school teachers for each age group, how to understand the psyche of the children at this age, what lessons are suitable for the teachers to speak about, how to deal with the children at this age, because he studied a lot of psychology, especially from Friedrich Froebel, who was a German scholar, who was the one who established the kindergarten system. So he was very well, attuned to all of the latest teachings out in the world at this time and utilized it. So nobody could be accredited to teach Sunday school without this qualification. Those living in remote areas might study by correspondence, so not just in the main cities, but he also sent this material by mail to people that were in the villages or teachers that were in far areas, marking the first time that distance education had been offered in Egypt. So he's the first one to give attention to the importance of distance education. Now we have it in a more modern form through the internet and so on, but at that time there was no such things. Habib Gerges always tried to devise new methods of reaching out to his teachers in endeavoring to make education accessible to all. He was well ahead of his time, without any doubt whatsoever. By the mid-1940s, the Sunday school movement was well established throughout Egypt. It was highly regarded not only in church and religious circles, but also in government circles and by Egyptian society as a whole. It was very well recognized. Habib Gerges implemented a new committee structure and administrative system. The Higher Central Committee for Sunday Schools and the Coptic Youth League in the See of St. Mark was established to oversee all of the whole enterprise. Today, the patriarchal archives beneath St. Mark's Cathedral in Cairo house a treasure trove of documents pertaining to the work of Habib Gerges. As I mentioned, over 7,000 pages, including correspondence to and from Habib Gerges, reports on the Sunday school movement and the seminary, various budgets, curricula, and many of the standard forms that Habib Gerges devised to gather important information from the Sunday school branches. Habib Gerges believed that a well-structured administrative system was necessary in order to educate, and he gave great attention to implementing such a system for the Sunday school movement and the Coptic Youth League. So we would have these forms where each teacher would fill out for every student. When the student attended Sunday school, did they have Holy Communion this week? Have they been visited? What was the lesson that they learned? Issues that may be happening in their home, so that the teacher would have a full report of every child in his Sunday school. And then this was done for the whole church and then for the whole diocese, and this is how he collected information. You are here in Silicon Valley, and data is key. They say data is king in Silicon Valley. So I'm sure some of you here know this. So for Habib Gerges, data was king as well. Collecting information was important so that he could use this information to better serve those people and to better serve the children. In 1937, Habib Gerges wrote his second curriculum, another 4-volume series for use at the elementary level titled المبادئ المسيحية الأرثوذكسية للمدارس الابتدائية, Christian Orthodox Principles for Elementary Schools Grades 1 to 4. And Habib Gerges established a unified curriculum that would standardize the programs, lessons, pictures, and strategies circulated in Sunday schools throughout the See of St. Mark. And the purpose of a unified curriculum was to maintain a spirit of unity in the church. This was very important to him. To safeguard consistency of teaching, that everywhere in every bench we're teaching the same Orthodox faith, and preserve doctrines and traditions so that the schools might carry out their mission in the most perfect form for the glory of the Savior and the ministry of his church. While working on the general curriculum, Habib Gerges also included a 52-week curriculum for the spiritual edification and pedagogical development of teachers. Further, Habib Gerges prepared support materials for teachers that were published and distributed in the 6 volumes of what was known as the Educational Studies for Teachers of Coptic Orthodox Sunday Schools. We don't even have probably something like this now as part of our Sunday school curriculum that is targeted towards teachers themselves. But he was doing this 100 years ago. Amazing. In their entirety, these volumes address teachers of children from infancy until 13 years of age, describing how lessons should be prepared on a solid pedagogical and psychological foundation. As such, the books tell us much about Habib Gerges' educational philosophy and pedagogical views. Volume 6, for example, targets children aged 10 to 13 and is divided into 4 sections. The first outlines the most important characteristics of children of this age group. The second discusses methods of teaching them. The third describes the most important skills that teachers need for effective teaching. And the fourth has questions for reviewing the material that he presented. He advocates, this is very interesting, I will give you a quote from him. He advocates a holistic view of child development by stating this. This is what he says. This is the own words, Habib Gerges' own words. Quote, teaching is neither the dictation of advice, nor of orders, nor of instruction. Rather, it is the participation between the teacher and the child in a common spirit of knowledge. I read this and I was astonished. Back at that time, it was all, and if you went into any school, it was all about a teacher speaking mono-dialogue, one direction, teacher to students, yeah? But this is not what Habib Gerges is saying here. He's saying something completely different. He's saying instruction, education is not about just instruction. It's more than this. It's about the dialogue between the teacher and the student, two-way discussion, learning together in a spirit of for knowledge, in a common spirit for knowledge. This is a man who is very enlightened and knew the latest educational philosophies that were being taught around the world. No one in Egypt was saying that. He continues to say, therefore, it is the teacher's duty not to dictate information or to hand out absolute orders to these children in their care. Incredible. But they should provide them with the opportunity to discover everything on their own. If you read the latest educational philosophies that are out there, this is what it's about today. It's about the teacher there is a facilitator only, encouraging the children to learn on their own. Yeah? Habib Gerges was doing this 100 years ago. Amazing. He continues to say.
I have a question on that.
Yes.
He was doing that 100 years ago. If we look nowadays,
We have gone backwards.
so
That's why I'm saying we need to learn from this legacy of this man, what he was teaching.
But I'm saying, trying to say, the way we educate in Egypt, we dictate.
Yeah,
So we are walking backwards.
exactly. And in our church, in many of the Sunday schools, if you go into many of the Sunday schools, you'll find the same.
It's a sad thing.
I'm not saying everywhere, but you'll find that this is the situation in many places.
He was ahead of his time.
Sayyidina, I want to be able to read his writings about
It's in
how
Arabic.
to do it.
It's in Arabic. Not much of his books have been translated yet. But, it's still, it's very fascinating to read. But obviously, now we have educational philosophies have developed much more greater ways. But at least it gives you an idea of how the man was thinking back then. And we need to learn from this legacy to move ahead to the next stage. Yeah. But he has 6 volumes about this for teachers, but they have not been translated yet. They're in Arabic, unfortunately.
We are way behind.
Let's continue what he says. That's why I'm here to try to at least making you to realize what was happening and what we need to do.
This is
You
a
know?
big problem.
I feel this is an important part of my ministry and work, to make our churches around the world, wherever I'm invited, to be aware of the importance of how we do religious and theological education today. He continues to say, discover everything on their own, and offer sufficient assistance to enable them to make these discoveries. Yeah? So the teachers, they just assist, give the clues, and then to make the students themselves to discover. Among the aims of this important theory of education are: 1, listen to this, to ensure that the child lives a virtuous life from an early age, and to go beyond stating mere facts about how to live it thereafter. 2, to ensure that activity gives rise to vigor. 3, to combine, listen to this, to combine research with pleasure and happiness, and to reap and harvest the results, to deepen the effects of research on life. He's connecting what? Education, research with happiness. When I was doing my PhD at Fordham University in New York, one of the books that we studied was a book titled Happiness in Education. This is what they're teaching in educational philosophies today, but it was there, Habib Gerges was teaching it 100 years ago, that he's saying to them that education should be something enjoyable for the children. Not rote learning, not something boring, but something where they are discovering and learning, and a place where they are happy. To combine research with pleasure and happiness. And 4, to ensure that the pleasure and happiness of the children ignite their inner desire for knowledge rather than mere facts provided for memorization. Every time I read what this man writes, he just blows my mind. Unbelievable. Such pedagogical views stem from those of 19th century German educator Friedrich Froebel, dubbed the inventor of the kindergarten, who championed child-centered education. And this is now what is taught. If you go to the education department in universities, that's what they teach, child-centered education. Like Froebel, Gerges wanted children to see themselves as part of the unity of the world and encouraged teachers to help youngsters develop self-determination and freedom. Habib Gerges also insisted that teachers inspire children to meet their own needs and establish their own identities. We know that Habib Gerges was aware of Froebel's work, for he mentioned him in his writings. He was reading this German scholar. This example gives us a glimpse into how Habib Gerges drew upon the theories of Western thinkers and educators to give Coptic Sunday school teachers a modern educational philosophy crystallized in Arabic that they could implement in their classes if they heeded his advice. And I hope that today we heed his advice from this time ago. Poetry and hymnology also played an important role. Habib Gerges believed that he could teach the central beliefs of the Coptic faith to children through hymns that he wrote himself. He also favored the use of hymns because they were part of the Orthodox tradition that he strived to preserve. Habib Gerges' efforts in the ministry of Sunday schools were crowned when in April of 1948 he was appointed editor-in-chief of the well-known publication Majalat Madaris al-Ahad, Sunday School magazine, which was a religious education and educational and social magazine, which had been founded the previous year. The magazine under Habib Gerges' direction included a variety of articles for Sunday school teachers and parents, and these might discuss how to manage a troublesome child in the classroom, how to conduct prayer meetings and their effect on the ministry, moral education, or how to encourage children to practice at home what they had learned at Sunday school, as the following piece by Habib Gerges demonstrates. Listen to this. This is incredible as well. He says this: a student who was 12 years of age came to Sunday school for the first time. The lesson was about prayer, and the teacher explained a sample of this prayer. When the young boy went home, at the family meeting in the evening, he brought out the Holy Bible, opened it, and surprised the family, 12-year-old boy, surprised the family by telling them that he would read the chapter aloud and that they would afterward pray, "Our Father who art in heaven." The entire family submitted to this young boy, and in this way, the family began for the first time to practice family prayer. This deed, Habib Gerges says, should have been carried out by the father, should have been carried out by the father. But the student of Sunday school accomplished what the father neglected to do. "O Father, will you reclaim your status as the priest of the family?" he asks. "If you do not wish to do so, or are incapable of such, then we have a humble request," Habib Gerges says. "We beseech you not to stand in the way of your son, but allow him to live in freedom in the bosom of his God." Amazing words, really. That what should be the role of the father as the priest of the family is taken over by the child from one lesson in Sunday school. So it shows you the important role that the father has in the family as the one who should be responsible, of course, with his wife, to educate the children. You spend the most time with your children at your home. What are you doing to educate them in their faith? Despite the many early obstacles, Habib Gerges' efforts ultimately brought success to the Sunday school movement. The handful of Sunday schools that he had set up at the outset of his mission at the turn of the 20th century had, by the end of his life, grown to more than 650 branches, offering 2,100 classes across all of Egypt, Sudan, and the Wahat, with 43,000 children being educated by 2,500 teachers and assistants. So you can see how it expanded so rapidly all throughout Egypt. In 1948, he writes this near the end of his life. He says, "These days we are no longer in need to write about the importance of Sunday school to the church. Its practical effects in the lives of the children and the teachers have become manifest. Its spirit and principles have nourished homes immensely. Fathers and mothers have felt its value in the lives of their children. Parents have loved it, for it has also influenced their lives in an indirect way. Children have imparted the message of life to their parents. The time in which we exerted every effort to convince our fathers, the bishops and priests, of the importance of Sunday schools has passed. Now not only do we see them encouraging it, but requesting its expansion in all the cities and villages in their dioceses. Every priest desires to have a Sunday school in his parish. Sunday schools did not reach this stage except after the clergyman trusted in it when it proved itself to be one of the members of the church. It is in fact among its most important members. Being in the bosom of the church allows it to develop and thrive. And from its milk, one can drink and learn. From Sunday school, from its milk, one can drink and learn. One may grasp its laws and traditions and remain firm." And I look at Sunday schools around our churches and even in my own diocese, and I ask myself, our parishes, what importance do we give to the Sunday schools in our parishes? What budget does each of our parishes place for Sunday schools? What buildings do we have and proper classrooms do we have for Sunday schools? If we care about the nourishment of these children, how do we show this practically? Are we really interested in the education of our children and our youth? Or is it something on the side that is not important? They're only young, we don't care. We don't place a budget, we don't even have a special building with proper classrooms. Hardly any of our churches, look abroad or even in Egypt, you will not find, rarely, proper sized classrooms. We put them in small boxes that we call classrooms and shove 30 kids in there with no facilities whatsoever. And then we get upset when the kids are rowdy in the classroom. What do you expect when you put them in a sardine can like this? Yeah? Why are teachers in schools, in secular schools, in primary school, for example, one teacher can keep a whole class interested for a whole day with the same teacher, and we can't keep 20 kids quiet for 30 minutes in a Sunday school classroom? Why? Because we're not doing that right. We're not learning the lesson from the legacy that Habib Davis has left us. So we need to think in a new way and make a new strategy for the Sunday school movement in Egypt and in particularly abroad. How to put a budget. We build beautiful churches everywhere. We spend tens of millions of dollars to build a church. But does this church have a proper Sunday school building? No, because we don't care. Our focus, I'm not saying that having a beautiful church is wrong, don't get me wrong. I love to have beautiful Coptic churches. But there is also something very, very critical and important. Will these churches be around in another 50 years, 100 years? Or will they become museum pieces will say, oh, there was a beautiful Coptic church here 50 years ago. But where are those that were children that grew up in the church and were educated? Were they educated properly, that they continued the legacy? It's something for us to really consider and think about. And this is my final thing to say. In fact, while historians consider Pope Kyrillos IV as the father of Coptic reform, Habib Gerges should be considered the father of education, both religious and theological, in the modern Coptic era. Moreover, he is to be regarded as the educational administrator par excellence of his time. This is evident through the efforts that Habib Gerges exerted at the Coptic Theological College, and we will discuss this tonight, through the statutes that he designed to run the Theological College in 1912, and through his efforts as dean to operate the Theological College on sound administrative principles, as well as through his organizing the Sunday school movement. This only gives you a glimpse into the work of Habib Gerges concerning religious education and the Sunday school movement. If you want more knowledge and deeper idea about his work in the Sunday school movement, you will find it in the book, in chapter 3, titled "From Its Milk One May Drink and Learn." The Sunday school movement has a whole chapter in the book about this. But I thank you for your attention. I apologize for speaking long. The book is in English, but it has been translated in Arabic and will be published later this year. If you have any quick questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Sayyidina, why didn't you personally take the initiative of translating all this work or the 7,000 documents that you found?
Because I'm a bishop.
I mean, you had the opportunity of
It is a big task. It needs a whole team of people to work with me, but I have a dream that I can publish one day the collected works of Habib Gerges in Arabic and in English. This would be a multi-volume work where all of what he wrote can be published and a critical edition in Arabic and in English. I think it would be very worthwhile for the church. So pray that God may give me time to do this. Any other questions? But not anyone. It has to be people that are scholars that can do critical edition and work with me on this. Yes?
What was Habib Gerges' like thoughts on training? It's an education and training, like in terms of not just having education, but like if you want to do something for, like if you want to express how to like give to the poor, like would he have like programs and what would it look like?
Yes, because he established many societies in Egypt. So they weren't only educational societies, but also he cared for many of these other social needs within the community. And so he established many different Coptic societies for all of these different activities.
Where did he get, I mean, it seems like he does a lot of work.
I don't know when he used to sleep.
No, I'm talking about the 30. I mean, it seems like this is a work of a pope to direct things like this, like education, college.
But there was no one that was interested.
So he had done this.
But the Pope was supporting him.
Okay.
He was the personal deacon of Pope Cyril V, and we'd meet with him every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. for a meeting to discuss many of these issues. The Pope was very impressed by his work and supported his work very much. Yeah. So if he didn't have this backing
That's what I was saying.
of this great patriarch, it would have been very difficult for him. Yes.
I wonder why when you went down to the archives and you asked to see anything about Habib Gerges and all that, they said, we don't have this, we have other things, so and so on. They did this twice with you, they wouldn't tell you. Why were they hiding all this?
Because, as I mentioned, there is this fear that Western scholars may come to Egypt and publish books with negative or write something that may be critical that we may not agree with. So better we stop anyone from the West to come to do any research about our church. I'll give you another example. Okay. Before I started my work on Habib Gerges, I was working on Arabic manuscripts of the life of Saint Shinuti, the Archimandrite. So there is many Arabic manuscripts because the life was written in Coptic and then later centuries was translated into Arabic. So in many of our monasteries there is the Arabic life, the translation of the life of Saint Shinuti written by Saint Louis. Okay? In the Coptic Museum there is a manuscript, and I wanted access to the Arabic manuscript. But this is under the authority of the Antiquities Department, which at the time was under Zahi Hawass. Okay? So I had to get permission from Zahi Hawass. Okay? So when I went to the museum, I told them I want this manuscript. I need to photograph it. What I was told, no, this takes 3 months. You put in a letter, and then we will respond to you after 3 months. I told them I'm leaving after tomorrow. I need to take this with me. So I wrote a letter on the suggestion of someone that here is a Coptic scholar and the West are attacking Egypt in one of the books, and this man is coming to show the truth about Egypt. It was signed in 2 seconds. So the image of Egypt is very important to them. And it's true, I did not lie, by the way. Right? Because there is a book by a scholar who had written about Saint Shinuti, and he wrote a very aggressive appearance of who Saint Shinuti was. So this is how you get things done sometimes. But
even it's true, even the Vatican archives is the most secure place on earth that nobody can have access. So the Vatican.
that's not true.
That's
No, if you go to the Vatican and you wanted to get any manuscript, you can get it.
not all. There are other archives that is not.
But manuscripts, you should be able to get copies for a scholar, should be able to get a copy of a manuscript. There may be other Vatican documents that's something separate. But if I go to the British Library, for example, they have lots of Coptic manuscripts. I went there, I found 2 manuscripts of the Arabic life of Saint Shinuti. I was able to get a microfilm of it, no problem. But it's changing in Egypt a little bit. Yes.
لا شك أن ربنا تحنن على الكنيسة وعلى اللي بيحصل، فده عمل روح قدس في حبيب جرجس.
بس مهم نتعلم منه، يعني مش بس نيجي ونحضر محاضرة وخلاص وننسى، لكن ازاي اللي احنا نكمل المسيرة بتاعته في أيامنا. Yes.
So what do we have as plans to put his ideas in act?
Well, you have a book,
We have a book.
right?
We have a plan.
My role is a messenger. Wherever I'm invited, I'll come and speak and give you the legacy and the message, and you have material. It's up to each church now to decide, and each diocese what they want to do about this. But I can't control a whole church. I'm only a bishop of a small diocese في الأرياف في استراليا.
You are one of the messengers. And the West had a lot of messengers coming into Egypt. And they established churches. And where did the population of these churches come from? Came out of the Coptic church.
That's right.
And we are just it's like, well, they flourished and we decline.
We didn't decline because, you know, even though that there was the illiteracy and there was the lack of education, but the Copts still loved their church. And the Copts loved their saints and the martyrs. And they kept their faith. And the majority of them did not follow after the Western missionaries that came. And they kept their faith intact, even despite this fierce attack that came to them and proselytism that came to them. So they are resilient people, and God protected them for 2,000 years and will continue to protect them. Yeah? But if it wasn't for people like Saint Habib Gerges, maybe things may have changed.
Sayyidina, I am really surprised that the patriarch in Egypt, the leader of all churches, is not doing something about it.
Who said he's
There
not?
So that's what we want to know. What are they doing?
Yeah, come on, things are changing slowly. Yeah? So they're setting new curriculums, as I mentioned, that they're setting up a new central committee for Sunday schools. So I think this year, in the year of the celebration, they started to think and learn from the legacy of Habib Gerges. So we wait and see what will happen. Yes?
Considering the Sunday school within, I know there's several, I guess, youth that are within different churches, like within Sunday school that there is several youth, and then as they grow up, several youth leave the church because of the I guess their mentality starts to change because they think the culture has affected the religion and the views of the religion. So I guess how do you, if someone comes up to you and tells you that your culture is the main effect within the religion, and that how could I believe something within a culture that has, I guess, affected the throughout like years, several years? How would you respond and tell him? I guess how would you respond?
It needs a lot of work, you know. That's not something that you can resolve overnight. But if you have an active church and an active Sunday school movement within your parish, and an enlightened group of Sunday school teachers that sit with the parish priest and think about the curriculum, think about what they're teaching, okay? What needs to be changed in the curriculum to make sure that it is authentic Orthodox and at the same time not influenced by certain things in culture that have nothing to do with faith. You know, I'll give you an example, right? We speak about mission, the importance of mission and evangelism in our church today abroad. Yeah? So we have mission churches being established in many different places. In my diocese in Fiji, for example, we have churches being established in Japan, in China, etc., etc. Right? And even we encourage it within our regular parishes in North America and Australia, etc. Right? But are our communities ready for such mission and evangelism? And my answer to you would be no. Why? A story. A Western person comes in to a Coptic church, comes and sits in one of the pews next to a blessed old Coptic lady that's lived in the church all her life, right? And this young American girl comes and sits next to her and crosses her legs in the church. What does the old blessed Coptic lady do? She slaps her on her leg with the left. Yeah? Do you think that girl, American girl, will come back into a Coptic church again? She will say, these are backward people, right? And will walk out of the church and never come in again, right? Now, the old Coptic lady is not doing something wrong, right? Because this is how she has been brought up in the church, according to Egyptian culture, for tens of years, that it is disrespectful to cross your legs in the church. Whereas in any Western church, this would be a way of a sign of respect to be in the church for a woman, right? So all these cultural mindsets has to be part of the education of a whole community in how to receive someone into the church. Or a young man comes into the church for the first time and maybe has a couple of tattoos and an earring. What happens? People will start giving them all these dirty looks. Yeah? But this is someone who's coming looking for their salvation. They came to a church. Why are we judging them by what their outer appearance is? Whereas God looks at the heart. Yeah? So there's lots of things like this. How we begin to train and prepare our communities for mission and evangelism. This is a huge issue. Yeah? And if you have this group in the Sunday school that are looking at the curriculum and seeing how it is adaptable and acceptable according to our Orthodox faith, then things like that would not happen in the future.
But there's an argument to this, because our body is the body.
But this is someone that doesn't know Christ.
I know.
واحد ما عرفش المسيح جاي للمسيح لأول مرة.
That's right. I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. I'm saying our rejection to the appearance or the custom of some people that we have done that is because of the fact that our belief is telling us differently.
That's fine. That's that. Yeah, and go back to the first century, right? When people were still heathens and pagans, did not know anything about Jesus Christ. And the apostles were beginning to preach to them. And they would have had, looked, all different types of people. What did they do with them? Did they reject them because they didn't look like them? Or if they accepted the faith, they baptized them. What did they do, the disciples? When St. Peter baptized 3,000 people in one day, they were from all different nationalities. We sometimes think that the only people that are going to be saved in this world is the Copts. That's what we think. We think we're the only church in the whole world. This is an elitist way of thinking that is rejected by God. God will accept anyone to Him if they come with the proper faith, according to the teaching of the Scriptures.
Where is the leadership in that? The leadership should say, this is like, I'm seeing a lot of things going wrong with the Coptic Church nowadays. Like when we say, all those who's coming forward and saying, miracles here, miracles there. This is not Christianity. This is like we're going back to the Dark Ages.
I spoke about this yesterday.
Yeah, the Dark Ages of Europe. So
yeah, we're getting off the topic now.
Yeah.
We want to go back to what we were discussing. Yes. No, at the back.
We go back to the topic of Sunday school.
Yeah.
Teaching of the true of the Orthodox Church, what we learned when we were young, or even learned from our saints, and the truth of the Orthodox Church is how we can. It's not how we. The problem is we know the answers, but sometimes we hesitate to work on our generations now, the new one. I'm talking about maybe for the past 10 years generation, is all what they care about is entertainment. They want to be, doesn't want to stay in class and just listen to a story from the Bible, but they want to do something else. This is why in our diocese or whatever churches, and I see that in many churches, it's like skip of generations. Some of them in college, some of them in high school. It doesn't get exactly what they really need. Right now, media, it's crazy. So many things outside is more attractive to them than the church itself. So we need to get back in a way.
No, that's the question. Is we need to ask ourselves how an authentic conservative church can be relatable to young people today. That's a skill. Yeah? And item I mentioned earlier about what attention do we give, what budget do we give to Sunday school? Do we sit and think, what are we doing for the Sunday school children, or is it just, not well prepared lessons? The classrooms are not well prepared. They go to their schools, they find beautiful classrooms, well decorated. They come here, maybe a filthy room, chairs. They come to the classroom, chairs are all over the place. It is not well decorated. It is not large enough. We need to think about this. What is the importance that we give to education and facilities, and the curriculum itself, and how to make the curriculum relevant to today's age, while at the same time teaching them the Orthodox faith in an attractive way. That's a challenge. Yes.
You mentioned that Habib Girgis said teaching must be through a dialogue, not one way.
Yes.
Did Habib Girgis touch it on how to do that?
Yeah, in the 6 volumes of how to teach each age group, he speaks about some of these things.
Is it something that simply we can follow?
The books are not readily available, unfortunately, because these were written many years ago. I only have a couple of the 6 volumes, not all of them. Yeah. But there is now more advanced methods, yeah? So you take the idea, the concept from him, and then go out there and find the latest educational philosophies that are out there to continue developing to something now that is relevant to you, even more relevant to people. But that just gives you headlines,
But he learned from the Western.
Yeah, he did.
So we
Yeah.
have to learn from everyone.
Yeah. I'll take one more question, Hashem. The over there, and then I'll take your question as well. So,
it seems you're saying that Sunday school was started, the main purpose of the Sunday school was education, but then it looks to me that we begin to learn a little bit to creating a society within the society, and maybe this has started in Egypt because of the discrimination, and then continued here and outside of Egypt because of we care about our culture and society that we own and own. And now it's not only for education. We are doing so many other things in the church, not only education, but we are actually creating a society. So I would like to hear your opinion on that. My opinion is it's very important in some ways, not only education angle, also so many other angles.
well, education can involve a lot of things, right? Is the coordinator of Sunday school, which is good. Education, by the way, is not something that only happens between 4 walls, right? It doesn't only happen in a classroom. If this is our understanding of education, then we have it all wrong. A teacher with his kids playing the soccer match in the park can be an educational, religious educational activity. Going and having a hamburger with his kids can be a religious education activity. Why? Because he'll have an opportunity, or she will have an opportunity. Maybe a topic will be opened by one of the children or by the teacher to begin engaging with them in religious dialogue. So we must have a broad understanding of what we mean by religious education. If it's the narrow concept that it's the half hour in the classroom, then we have it all wrong. Religious education is something that can happen anywhere. We learn from the ant. We watch an ant and see how the ant works. We can learn from the ant. We learn from each other. Yeah? The teacher can learn from the children. Right? So it's the whole community teaching the whole community. So if we have this concept, we'll do things much different way. Your last question.
Just a question, Sidna. Why is the theological education mandatory for clergy? You mentioned yesterday, you said that
Yeah.
to medical school.
Yeah.
Why isn't it until now, it's not a mandatory?
That's the $100 million question that I wish I had an answer to.
I mean, in our case, we don't have bishop, we don't have a bishop. And if we don't give the education from above, how do you expect us to get educated? And we don't have schools around here. Our Sunday school is doing wonderful, by the way. Just have to tell you,
I'm not attacking anyone, I'm just giving ideas. I'm just giving ideas, no more.
We're very thankful
Yeah.
for our Sunday school teachers. But how do you expect us to reach that level without?
Look, now things are starting to change, okay? So, in Los Angeles, there is a theological college there, and I know they do some courses online. My theological college in my diocese, this is, my top priority in what I do. So now it is fully accredited. We started by teaching a diploma in theology, which was undergraduate, and now the university that we are part of, which is called the University of Divinity, has now approved us to teach from undergraduate awards of diploma in theology all the way up to PhD. So we teach diploma in theology, we teach master's degree, bachelor's, all the way up to PhD, and it's all available online through St. Antonius College. We have a website, and so now it's giving more opportunities for people around the world to be able to have an accredited degree, because remember that these universities, they put us through very strict guidelines. They don't give you the allowance to teach up to PhD unless you are a qualified institution. So they check your curriculum very carefully. They check the qualifications of your faculty. They check every unit that you teach, if it's at the proper level. They check even the references that you give to the students, that they are not archaic things from 100 years ago, but the most recent scholarship is in your unit outlines. They put you through the ringer to make sure that you are at the proper academic standard. So anyone getting a degree from St. Athanasius College can be assured that they're receiving a world quality theological education. I don't know what other colleges do, but I can only speak for what we do in Melbourne. I'm hoping that here in North America, I know the bishops here are speaking regularly and trying to form one powerful theological college. I think that will be wonderful if this happens, because I think it's very much needed in North America. But this is what we have at the moment. Yes?
Just want to add something with the, a couple weeks ago in our last servant meeting, where our coordinator said that we are hopefully next month, all the servants will start the course on online course, and that will help the servants. So I just want to tell Maggie that we're getting there.
That's good, but I believe for Sunday school teachers and youth leaders, it is really worth their time getting a proper qualification, right? An accredited qualification. This is not only going to enrich your own life, but it's going to enrich the lives of those children that you are teaching. And that's what we need to reach to that standard. And for me now, with all the priests, at least all the priests that I have ordained in my diocese, I'm making as a minimum standard for any priest to complete a Master's of Divinity, which is a 3-year full-time program. They can do it part-time, but I'm hoping I can reach to the stage where I have enough candidates before ordination that have already completed that level of education that I can choose from for the priesthood. This is what should happen. Not after they are ordained priests, but before. And this is what Habib Gerges was talking about. And tonight we'll talk more about this subject. I was going to show you some photos, but
That's what the Catholic churches do. Catholic churches.
all churches do that. We're the only church that does it. So maybe tonight we get the opportunity to show you some interesting photos of Habib Gerges and his work and his family. I apologize for speaking too long, but when I get started on this topic, I get carried away. Thank you very much for listening, and glory be to God forever.
We'll start at 6:30. I just want to mention again that the book of Habib Gerges is in our bookshop, as yesterday said, assigned about tens of copies of this book. So if you want to get it, it's 50% off. I think Karim is here. I saw him. Okay, I will open the bookstore for you if you want to get it. We'll start with the choir today after the Vespers at 6:30. Please come. من الدنيا زبسرتي كيوكي أجيوكي موتي كيوكي
Conosce volingo e moje open choice, isos betre, sos vieta vașme pe sarose, che complemer satana, sabe sitene, chala, sodiamono, nainana, che ciet, caris in moi sistimeto, temneci, sere, chimetello, ente, jacobino, gnai, temato, sala, vicatiet sopete Davidi, sopeia, ente solo, mopiet pneuma, practiton, pieta, viesne, ni apostol, sus efeare, eva ontimetaho, era tempeniote, taiot, narcires, Baba Tawadros, Nempeniotre, Pescovas, Abba, Suriel, Notite, Veta, Rohi, Geno, Etronos, Rahan, Mission, Rompinum, Hanseo, Enhilini, Con Etetre, Enogaditios, Sapasite, no, Echalagen, Cole, Tomere, Christos, Erea, Gontecane, Novinani, Voltric, O, Kirini, Catapet, Nishtena, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie Vlogison, Amines, Moero, Estima, Tania, Gonia, Volcom, Piesmo. Amin, Shobi.
O Lord, make us ready to pray thankfully. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, for thine is the kingdom and the glory forever. Amen. The love of God the Father and the grace of his only begotten Son, and the gift and fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Go in peace. May the peace of the Lord be with you.